We live? All right. Hello.
Go.
Okay, we're good to go. I'm not exactly sure what the prompts were. Michael's over here, and he's with us in spirit and in person for me, but not for you. So thank you guys so much for coming. I'm really excited. Is it a good time for people to start putting questions in?
No, we've got some questions already. We've got
Okay.
some questions written down.
Yeah.
But right now, folks can just let us know where they're coming from. That's awesome.
Yes.
And we will, we got a lot to cover tonight, so
Yeah.
it may be a little bit longer. And please excuse if our Wi-Fi signal goes down.
Yeah, it's already been kind of pooping out once already, but we're gonna just keep rolling with it and we'll figure it out. Okay, so my main goals for this evening, other than just answering as many questions as I possibly can, is to go ahead and shape a couple of loaves with you to talk about that process and how I do it. I am going to walk you through how to make a leaven. So I have my stiff starter over here. I will show you how I make the leaven and kind of what to look for to know when your leaven's ready. And then we will also walk through the process of making a starter from scratch. So some of these things are in detail in the course that we also have available. But I will just kind of walk you through briefly how I do those things. So the first thing we're just going to jump right in is shaping loaf. So I have my oven preheated to 450. My Dutch oven is in the oven getting nice and toasty. And this just, look at that giant bowl of dough. This is a double batch of dough. If it were I always make a double batch of dough because I usually want a loaf to throw in the freezer or to give to the farm crew. So it kind of exploded. It was a little warmer today than I thought it was going to be. But this is life. This is what happens. So it's not overapproved. It's just probably wasn't a big enough bowl. So if you just see all the webbing, oh, that is just good news for the sourdough baker, because that's the lift and the reason it'll be light and airy when we bake it, and it won't be dense. So when you're proofing dough that first time in your bulk ferment, a couple of the things that you want to look for to know that your dough is ready, because you won't always have dough that doubles, like half its size, that grows half in size. Sometimes it'll only get like 20% bigger. But if you see that like nice little jiggle, 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 like soft set custard, that is a good sign. When you kind of poke it and your finger just kind of indents, like you can kind of feel the air you're knocking out of it when you poke it. That's great. I really love to use glass bowls because they're cheap and you can find them anywhere, but also because I can see visually, I had this in the fridge for just a second, you can see the air bubbles that are growing on the inside of the bowl. So especially when you're starting, if you can find a glass bowl, or if you have one, it's a great thing. If you don't worry about it, because there's plenty of other ways to see that your dough is proofed. But this is a glass bowl is a good thing. I don't know what that is. A little something. Okay, so I'm going to pour this out onto my counter. You can lightly flour your counter if you want. You don't have to. And then I'm going to use my bench scraper, which I really, really love. And it's just a piece of plastic to kind of just work my dough out of the bowl here. I don't usually flour my work surface, but you certainly can. For some things I will, like cinnamon rolls. I'll do that. Like I made bagels this morning and I didn't flour my work surface. The bagel dough is really, really thick and I want to use the word tough, but that's not really what I mean. I mean, like a bagel, it's kind of a dense, chewier texture, so the dough is denser. All right, so you could weigh your dough and be very exact with splitting your loaf, but I just kind of eyeball it because that's what I'm doing. I think this one's a little bigger. I'm going to push that one out of the way there. And this is my dough now. Now, I like to do something called lamination before I shape my dough, which it's literally, I think lamination, I'm going to lay out my dough. That's kind of how I think about what it is that I'm doing. So I'm just going to kind of pull it out. Doesn't have to be perfect, but we're just kind of stretching it back out here. And you see it's like not sticking to the counter. It could stick a little bit, but that's where this bench scraper is really, really handy. And I just kind of like to get it in whatever shape it kind of feels like it's naturally going to go to. This is a really fun time to add in nuts or seeds, dried cranberries, cheddar cheese, roasted garlic. Somebody did some hatch chilies and cheddar cheese the other day I saw, and I was like, that needs to happen. We make a cowboy candy sometimes at the farm. This would be ideal for cowboy candy. So from here, I'm going to kind of roll my dough up. I think of it in thirds. So I just move it over this way, and I flip it over here again. And now I'm going to do thirds the other direction. Here, here. And then I just kind of roll it up and tuck and swirl. I don't know if that's a good descriptor of what I'm doing, but I'm just kind of tightening my loaf. I'm wanting it to get really taut on top, but I also am trying to seal up that bottom seam that I created. So there you go. I'd like to give it a little pat. Good job. We did it. And then I throw it into my proofing basket. Now, if you don't have a proofing basket or a banneton, totally fine. Get a small bowl. I often use this bowl. I just have flour in it right now. But I'll just put a cotton tea towel in here and then put the loaf in there and use that as my proofing basket. And I will throw that in the fridge to do its cold proof. Now, you don't have to do a cold proof. I like to do a cold proof for a couple of reasons. I think that a cold proof develops flavor without the sourdough becoming like going back into starter, without it like breaking down, because it's proofing so slowly in the fridge. But it does really help develop flavor. All the time that sourdough takes is part of the flavor development. So if you like a really sour sourdough, one of those things is keeping it in the fridge a little longer to help develop some of that flavor. The other thing I like about popping it in the fridge is that if you have any sensitivities to grain, you are going to really appreciate that extra fermentation time that it takes in the fridge. It helps continue to break down the phytic acid. It keeps developing, like all the bacteria is eating on the grains and doing that pre-digestive work that we would appreciate our bodies not doing. So that was one of the things that was really crucial in us being able to eat gluten again, was a 24-hour fermentation time. So I think about like maybe 8 to 10 hours on the counter, and then the rest of that time is in the fridge. And when I do that long fermentation in the fridge, it's like our bodies don't respond to it at all. We feel great. So something to keep in mind. All right, now we're going to just kind of pretend that this spent some time in the fridge, but for the sake of television, whatever this is, for the sake of Facebook, we're going to go ahead and pop this in the oven. So one of the other tools that I really like is this bread mat. I believe it's Rose Hill Sourdough that makes these. They're from Canada. They're fantastic. If you don't have a silicone mat or something like this, just use a piece of parchment paper. That works totally fine. I just found myself going through, I was reusing parchment paper, but even at that, I was going through a lot of parchment paper. So I got one of these puppies, and we've been friends ever since. So you want to put your bread in whatever proofing basket or bowl you're using, pretty side down, ugly side up, seam side up is what they say. Because when you're doing this, you're popping it out onto.
Does it go directly from the refrigerator to the oven after being dumped in the bowl or banneton?
Yes, you can bake it straight from the fridge. It doesn't have to do like a room temperature fridge, at least for this loaf of bread. There are some recipes that you'll read, like the cinnamon rolls that I like to make. It does take a little while to come to like room temperature, or just an hour as your like oven's preheating. that you'll want to do like a second rise. But this can just be baked straight from the fridge. It's very forgiving. So that's a great question. All right, so now I'm going to score my bread, and scoring looks beautiful, but it's also to help the expansion of the loaf. So you're kind of giving it areas that you want it to expand, or you hope that it expands, as opposed to like blowing out the side or doing something kind of funky. You don't have to score it, but you might. I would be interested to do like a don't score a loaf side by side to just kind of see what they look like. I suppose if you shaped your loaf well, it will do some kind of weird expansion on top, but the scoring really helps you know where you want it to expand. So a really easy way, especially with round loaves, is to just kind of do like a cross hatch shape. And then I'll usually do like some fancy little scoring on the edges. For birthdays and stuff, I'll put people's ages or initials in the loaf, or the kids will be like, make me a fish. I'm like, okay. One time Simon asked for an elephant, and I said, that's too much for me. I can't do that. So now that we've got our loaf scored, we're going to go ahead and get our Dutch oven out of the oven that's been preheating. This is very warm. Should I bring the Dutch oven over there?
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to need some oven mitts here. I don't want to light anything on fire. I did that once with a very bad oven mitt. Okay, so this is our very hot Dutch oven. The other thing I like about this bread mat, it has these little tabs. So we're just going to drop it in. My Dutch oven is just a very basic Lodge Dutch oven. It's 6 quarts. We're going to put the lid back on, and then we're going to pop it into the oven for 20 minutes with the lid on, and then we'll take the lid off. And it'll do the second part of its bake. So there we go. Okay, so that's in the oven. Should I shape this loaf?
Yeah, where are you gonna? Yeah, you can just shape that and put it in the fridge.
Yeah, I'm gonna put it in the fridge.
I wonder if anyone's gonna hear
the trains.
The trains in the background.
I don't know. Okay, so we're gonna do this loaf. We'll walk that process again. This one's a little stickier, maybe just because it's been sitting over there for a second. Yeah, can you guys hear the trains? All right, so we're just stretching it out. And something about this kind of deflating of all the air that you've created and then rolling it back up, I don't know. I don't exactly understand all of the science behind it, but that is, some people shape their loaves a little differently. This is just how I have come to really appreciate shaping my loaves. So again, that was the kind of envelope turn. And now we're going to tuck it around again. And if you were doing a really high hydration loaf, like that had quite a bit more water, it would be a little stickier. You would really want to use your bench scraper more. And you might want to put a little flour down.
Janice says she can hear the trains.
Oh, good. They're kind of fun. I mean, when we first moved in, the first couple nights, the trains would go off, and we wondered what we had done. We weren't sure. So when I put this in the fridge, sometimes I will take this little cotton shower cap, for lack of a better word. I will dampen this, and I'll put that over it. But a lot of times what I do is just stick a plate over it, and it just kind of hangs out in the fridge like that. I might do both, actually, but I'll just put this in the fridge, and I will bake it tomorrow.
That was
right.
Glenn's question, so you got Glenn's questions done.
Okay, awesome. All right, so that is kind of that process. We will get that we'll take the lid off in 20 minutes, and then finish the bake. We probably won't have time to slice it, though, because it does take a while to cool.
Correct. Yeah,
But I guess we could push it a little.
Just show them what they
For the sake of the internet. Okay, so what are we doing next? Are we going to put together a starter, or should we talk about leaven, maybe?
What do you want to talk about?
Let's do leaven. Okay, so already in the videos you guys have seen, we talked about starters. We talked about how I keep a stiff starter. We talked about how to make more of a stiff starter when you're running low. And the beauty of this starter is that you don't have to feed it every day. And we really like that because we don't want to feed it every day. But you still need to take this starter and give it one more process before you're ready to bake bread. Now, there are a lot of fancy bread bakers out there who, even with their regular starters, will make a leaven. I just don't keep a regular starter, so I have to make a leaven in order to bake bread. So kind of the way, one of the common questions that we get a lot of is how long the whole process takes. Now, this is my leaven that I made last night. Can everybody see? Can you guys see this?
I can hold it up.
Hold it up. Let them see. Kind of bubbly. Turn it a little bit, like rotate it in your hand, but don't drop it. That is leaven that I made last night before going to bed. So leaven has kind of a longish shelf life. I like to use it when it's at its peak. This is a little past peak. So it would have been at its peak last night or this morning. But because it hasn't been super hot here, it is lasting a little longer. When it's really hot, temperature controls the time when it comes to sourdough. So if it's really warm, everything moves faster. So I wouldn't be able to make my leaven yesterday and have it tonight still in an active state. It would move into that discard state, so where it's run out of all of its energy and it's super liquidy, super pourable. Not dead, very usable, but not as my active ingredient to create the lift and the rise that I want in a loaf of bread. So this is leaven that I made. It's got big air bubbles. It's kind of soft set. It's like that jiggly custard, almost like my loaf was when it was fully proved, except this is a lot wetter and like kind of pourable. So I'm going to walk you through the process of making leaven. So I take some of my stiff starter. I like to do this in a quart-sized jar because it is going to grow quite a bit. Gotta have a kitchen scale. So if you're serious about this, you need to track one down. Track it down now. Put it onto grams. I'm gonna put our jar on. We're gonna zero it out, and we take like 30 grams of stiff starter. Put it in our jar here. All right. Now we're going to zero this out again, and we're going to do, we're going to do 130 grams of water. Again, this is just well water. If you have city water, you want to make sure it's filtered in some way so that it doesn't have any chlorine in it to kill the bacteria. This pitcher is really nice because it's easy to kind of dispense water slowly. And I want to get it as exact as possible, which seems a little fiddly, but honestly, I feel like the leaven and the making of the starter are kind of like weighing your ingredients is kind of the fiddliest part. Otherwise, it's pretty forgiving. So we're going to zero that out, and now that we've added the water, we're going to take our very sophisticated fork. And we're just going to smush it all around in the water. It's going to still be lumpy, but that's okay. We're just kind of wanting to integrate the water and the stiff starter together. I should get one of those really classy, like wooden spurtles, so it's not as loud, you know? But maybe this Christmas, huh? I got my llama last Christmas.
Teresa said she made a stiff starter for the first time today.
Oh, good job, Teresa. Was it Teresa?
Yeah, she has a starter and she made it into a stiff starter.
Nice. That's the best way to do it. That's honestly, if you can transition your starter into a stiff starter or get some starter from a friend, that is the quickest, most painless way of doing this. Okay, so now we're going to add 120 grams of flour to this water stiff starter slurry. And this little scoop is helpful for getting just a little bit of flour in and around your jar. Oh, so close. Okay. Almost there. All right. 120. Okay. So we stir this up. And this, if you are used to having a regular starter, is probably going to remind you of the consistency of your starter when you feed it. You're going to be like, oh, that's the consistency of my, get out, Matt, of my.
How much water did we put in that again?
120, 130 grams of water, 120 grams of flour. I'm stirring this up, and this is like gluey, pasty stuff.
And the water does not need to be warm?
I mean, you don't want cold water. Look, you can use cold water. It's just going to slow everything down. You want to use warm water to kind of keep it alive and bubbling. If you use hot water, you could kill your bacteria. So cold water, think slow cold. I'm cold. I don't want to move fast. Warm water helps things move a little quicker. So I just kind of go off of body temperature. Like if it feels just a touch warm to me, I know that I'm good to use that water. Or it's just my temperature. Around 100 degrees, 95. But I'm not taking my water's temperature before I use it. Okay, so that is our leaven, or it will be our leaven. Something I always encourage people that take my class to do is after they make their leaven, the first couple of times is to get a rubber band and put it on the outside of their jar so that they can watch. I mean, it will be obvious at some point, but at the beginning, you'll be like, I don't think it's doing anything. But even when it comes just, half an inch over your rubber band, you're like, oh my gosh, it's working. It's growing. Even you find it fascinating. You're always like, look at that.
Oh, I like things that grow.
You're like, that is true. You do.
You got a question here. What's the peak time for leaven?
The peak time for leaven, well, again, it's going to depend on the temperature. If it's cold, it's going to happen slower. If it's hot, it's going to happen faster. So in general, in the wintertime, I will make my leaven the night before and feel fairly confident. As long as I put my leaven somewhere that is warm-ish in the house. We have a very old, drafty house. So the place that's best for me to put loaves that I want to proof overnight or my leaven that I want to get ready for the next morning to start baking with or start mixing dough with is on top of a hutch in our dining room. There's a heat vent kind of right under it. So it just stays a little toastier over there. Some people will put it on top of their oven with like a light on above it. Some people have a proofing setting in their oven. I don't have one, or if I do, actually I do. I've just never used it. I've just come up with other ways to use it. I know there are some people who will kind of like turn their oven on for a little while, turn it off, like maybe you warm it to 170, you'll turn it off for a little while, and then they'll stick their dough or their leaven or their stiff starter in the oven, and they'll use that to kind of that residual heat to help keep things warm, especially going into winter. That is something that people will need to be thoughtful about. But if you keep your house at like 72 and you have a house that is able to hold heat, you should be pretty fine. You don't have to get too creative. But if you have a cold kitchen, you're going to want to find maybe another area in your house to put your bread. Something that I've also used is Michael always has things he's tinkering with. And there was a season where there was a crock pot on warm in his office. And he has this big Metro rack that just is like a catch-all for all the random things he's working on. And I was like, ooh, I can put my dough or my leaven or my starter on the rack above that crock pot because it was open and had like, what were you doing, vanilla?
Possibly.
Or tinctures or
yeah.
some concoction. And it was perfect because it wasn't too warm that it was going to like cook it and burn it, but it was just getting that like kind of warm, cozy residual heat from the warm crock pot. And, the dough really thrives.
But the warming setting on the crock pot's too warm. So you have to hack it. So there's a specific way if you want to make it specialized for it that you have to set it up.
Okay. Which you're going to do for us? if people want to.
Yes, if people ask for that, that can happen.
It can be a bonus. So by tomorrow morning, this leaven is going to be completely ready. It's going to be, it'll probably have more than doubled in size in this jar. It'll probably be up to the shoulder of this ball jar. And it'll be jiggly. There will be big bubbles, small bubbles. It will smell really nice. And it'll have a nice little jiggle when I jiggle it. I say jiggle a lot, but it really does jiggle. There's really no other way to say it. So I could start some loaves tomorrow morning, and that might work really well for me. I'll start some loaves in the morning, and by mid-afternoon, my dough will be proofed, and I can shape those puppies, and then I can either bake them or I can throw them in my fridge to bake throughout the week. I know some people who will put a lot of dough together. They'll make biscuits, they'll make bread dough, they'll make, bagels or something, and they'll just have it in their fridge to hold it and then bake it, kind of like their meal prep. Like that's their meal prep they do for the week. And then they can just bring it out to have with their meals as they want. So to answer the timing question, if your starter's already ready to go, then your leaven happens before you go to bed. The next morning, you're ready to throw some dough together. That evening, you could have a loaf of bread to bake, unless you're wanting that longer fermentation time for digestibility and health reasons. You really can have a loaf of bread easily within 24 hours of starting your leaven.
We got some questions here. Second proofing the dough has doubled at 11 o'clock at night. Could I have waited till the next morning and gone to bed instead of baking?
Yes, you could have just thrown it in your fridge.
Okay. Even though ours did get a little bit larger in the fridge.
It did, but I think it's because I was in and out of the fridge a lot.
Yeah.
It wasn't like I just put it in the fridge and then went to bed. I was like getting dinner stuff out and putting dinner stuff away.
Yeah,
so.
yeah.
I need a second fridge.
The question is, the whole stiff starter live in the fridge or the counter?
The stiff starter lives on your counter until it has done its beautiful growing webby self, until it's gotten activated is how I think about it. And then it lives in your fridge. It can stay on the counter for a while. It's not going to die or anything like that. But in general, it's going to stay in your fridge until you need it. And you don't have to let it come to room temperature to start making leaven. You don't have to baby it, but let it sit on your counter after you refresh it or feed it or make more of it. Then put it in your fridge after it has grown and doubled.
Another question on 11, do you tighten the lid or leave it loose?
I leave the lid loose while it is doing its activating fermentation. But once it's done the activating and fermenting, I go ahead and put it in the fridge with the lid on. I don't want it to dry out. That's the thought there. I want the gases to escape a little bit while it's growing, but I don't want it to, dry out in the fridge. Okay. Anything else?
I think that's most of the questions around this. There's a bunch of other questions coming through, but they're questions that we will get to in the Q&A because we've already got them written down.
Okay, cool.
So I think the next thing is to talk about making a starter from scratch.
Yes. So we're just making.
Just talking through that. Just note that we do have all that's in the course and that's instantly available.
Yeah. So if all of the stuff in the workshop that you watched was interesting and exciting to you, their course that is coming, it's coming, but there are a few videos that are already available. So if you buy the course tonight, there's 2 videos, four videos that you can watch instantly. One of them is about all the equipment and tools. Some of it's where I get it, just all the things that you may need. And then if you don't want to buy those things, or you don't have those things already and easily at hand, what you can use instead. Because I don't think that you need to go broke buying stuff for sourdough. The point is to save money. Or one of the points is to save money. So anyway, but the other video is all about how to create a sourdough starter, rehydrate a sourdough starter if you get a dehydrated one, and we are selling a dehydrated sourdough starter. My Ginny, what do we name her? Ginny. Michael and I met in Virginia, and Virginia is for lovers, so we decided that this was the best name for our sourdough starter. Oh, he's making a face. Anyway. And then the other option is to take an already existing wet starter or regular starter and convert it to a stiff starter, but also how to make a starter from scratch. Maybe that just really excites you and you want to make your own starter. Maybe you don't have access to anybody else's starter. You don't want to buy a dehydrated starter. There is a way to make your starter from scratch. So there's a whole video, and I show you lots of different stages that your starter may go through as you're creating it. So this is just a very kind of brief overview of that. But I will walk you through it. Again, you're gonna want a kitchen scale. How many times? I feel like it could be a drinking game. Not really. Just drink water.
If I was drinking, I would probably be pretty sauced right about now.
But anyway, don't drink alcohol. Just drink some water, and it could be fun. So I say the kitchen scale a lot because you're gonna need it. So I like to use these little 1/2 pint mason jars because, again, they're wide. When we're first starting a sourdough starter, it's not a lot of anything. So this size is really nice. So we are going to tear that, and we're going to start with, my cheat sheet here, 30 grams of flour. I'm going to need a little more flour. And I'm just using an organic all-purpose for this. I use an organic all-purpose for a lot of things. It's a great, stable, basic flour that's easy to get, especially as you're starting sourdough and kind of just getting used to some things. Really like a good AP. This is from Costco. Another drinking game we could play. How many times I talk about Costco? Okay. 30 grams. Nailed it. Okay.
Derek said he already finished his wine.
Oh, sorry, Derek. Another glass? No. Okay, I need this. Now we're going to do 23 grams of warm water into our 30 grams of flour. Wow. I just couldn't have done that better if I tried. All right. Again, with our very fancy fork. Oh, hold tight. Okay, so the 20 minutes is up. We're going to take the lid off of our Dutch oven, and then it's going to finish baking. Oh, she's cute. All right, and then I'm going to bake it for I'm going to do 17 minutes. Okay, I don't need this.
Someone wants a close-up of your flour.
Oh, it's organic. Unbleached.
It does say all-purpose up at the top. I'm not sure if you can see that.
Oh, okay. King Arthur has, a really good organic all-purpose flour.
Yeah, it does say all-purpose at the top. There's a little hard
It
to
does
see.
say all-purpose, and it also tells you the percentage of protein that's in this flour, and you definitely want something that's 11 or higher. This is 11.5. Like bread flour, I think, is somewhere around 12 or 13. And so and then you can get like really higher proteins for like pizza doughs and stuff. I mean, that's kind of fancy. You can make pizza dough with regular all-purpose. I do it every Saturday. Okay, so this is how we're making our starter. I don't want to say it's stiff. It's not the stiff consistency. It's a little bit like Play-Doh. I like to kind of put it in my hands sometimes and just kind of, it's a little sticky. But the bacteria that live on your hands are just as important as the bacteria that is in your flour and water. So this got really sticky. But now we're going to let that sit for 48 hours. So if it were me, I can usually remember if I need to do something the next day. But if I need to do something 2 days from now, I'm going to need to set like a reminder on my phone that I made a stiff starter. So that's another thing to note. I am not tightening this lid. I'm just kind of setting it on top. Another thing to note is that it can take up to 10 days to create a starter. So if you're going out of town for the weekend or, next weekend, I probably wouldn't start my starter until I got back, unless you have a very gracious friend or loved one that will tend to your starter while you're gone, because you do kind of want to stay consistent with this part. We're really trying to activate and liven up the bacteria that are in the flour, that's on the flour, and you just need to do something every day. Except for the first 2 days, you just let it sit. So this is starter that I made 2 days ago, and you can definitely see some bubbles, very tiny ones around the edges. It smells interesting, not great yet, and that is something to note. Your sourdough starter doesn't really smell good at first,
especially the gluten-free.
Oh, I don't even want to tell you what I thought the gluten-free starter. It smells great now, but when I was making it, I just kept looking at Michael going, I don't think this is working. Like, this is awful. And he was like, I don't know. So I just kept going. And finally, it started to smell like something appetizing. So what?
Side note, 17 minutes is how long we're cooking that second one?
Yes. Yeah.
At 450.
Yes.
People want the details.
I know. People want those details, which is fine. I want the details too. 450. People bake their bread at all kinds of temperatures. Sometimes I'll preheat my oven at 500 and kick it down to 425 to bake my loaves, but I kind of like, it's a little faster to do it at 450, and I like the crust that gets developed at 450. So, Michael, can you show them an up close of this starter after 48 hours? Okay. It has a little bit of like a gray tinge. Is it pouring out?
No, it's not pouring out.
Okay.
It's just hard to make sure I get it right in front of
Sure.
the camera.
It has a little bit of, I believe that's what they call calm yeast, I think, is what that kind of yellowish tinge is to it. The gray is fine. There's nothing wrong with it, even though it looks like you have made a very grave error. There's really nothing wrong with it. What I do at this point after the 2 days is I take 10 grams of this out of this jar, and into a clean jar, I add 30 grams of water and 60 grams of flour. And that is what you will do every day for the next week to 10 days. Maybe it'll happen in 5 days, but I like to think that it's probably going to take more like a week, especially if you've never baked sourdough before, you've never done anything with sourdough. It's just going to probably take a little longer. So you can just kind of move that gray weirdness to the side, and then just scoop out the yummy looking sourdough starter that's at the bottom. And you just need 10 grams of it, and the rest of it you will discard. You will not put it down your sink, because you don't want to call a plumber in a couple of weeks. So don't put it down your sink. You'll put it in your compost pile, you'll throw it in the trash, you'll feed it to the birds. It might feel a little wasteful because we want to not waste our discard when we're baking with our leaven, but when we're making a sourdough starter, this is the only time that you're really going to throw stuff out. You just don't need it. You just need a little bit of that bacteria, feed it some fresh water, some fresh flour, and give it another opportunity to just kind of sit and do its fermenting thing. You will know that your sourdough starter is ready when it starts to grow and bubble and do that activation within, if it's warm, probably 4 to 8 hours of feeding it or refreshing it. And in the wintertime, give yourself a good 8 to 12 hours. So that is how you can start your own sourdough starter from scratch, and just keep refreshing it. Keep taking 10 grams out, adding 30 grams of warm water, 60 grams of flour, and don't give up. Just keep baking with it. An established starter is a little easier to work with, but you can absolutely make your own starter from scratch.
Okay, cool. I think you've got all three of the things we're going to show them. I think we can just move into Q&A.
Okay.
Let's start the first one. This is the one that keeps coming up. People are asking about, different types of flours, that kind of stuff. Like they're saying, can I use corn? Can I use almond flour? That kind of stuff. So if you want to talk first about the whole gluten-free, let's chat gluten-free first a little bit, and then we can talk a little bit about like milling your own flour.
Okay. So flours is coming up.
Yeah.
Okay. When we're baking with this sourdough starter recipe that I'm kind of showing you, you're not going to be able to convert it to grain-free or gluten-free baking. However, if you don't, and I mean, this is so personal. I'll just speak for myself. My mom probably, she's never gotten diagnosed, but she, in my opinion and her opinion, has celiac disease. So she cannot eat the sourdough bread that I bake. However, when I use my discard, which is what happens to your leaven after all the energy has been eaten out of it, and it's super runny and very usable in recipes for pancakes, brownies, just all kinds of things, I'll make crackers. And instead of using an all-purpose flour with my discard, I will use a gluten-free all-purpose flour with my discard, and I will make gluten-free crackers. Now, she can eat those. Some people that have celiac disease cannot eat those. Maybe they could eat one, but who's eating one cracker? You know, you're going to eat like 10 crackers, and they might feel it. So it's not gluten-free. I have been immersing myself in gluten-free starters. There's a bonus when you purchase the course that is a gluten-free sourdough starter, like mini, what do you want to call it?
Just talking through how you do gluten-free.
Yeah, how I do gluten-free starters, a gluten-free bread, a gluten-free sandwich bread, that kind of stuff. Yeah. It's possible.
But I think you probably don't want to, again, I have no clue about this. You probably don't want to just use like a almond flour.
No, almond flour is like a whole other animal. Yeah. It's a nut. So not that I've made plenty of tasty things with almond flour, but you're not going to bake, you can bake bread with almond flour, but that's almost like making a pancake batter and then baking it in a loaf tin or something.
And corn is not a good.
You can use corn. There's actually somebody that I was reading today that she uses corn in her gluten-free sourdough starter and loaf. She uses a corn flour. It's a masa, though. It's not just a corn flour. And so masa is a little different because it has been soaked in, is it lime? I think. Anyway.
Yes, I think that is correct.
I think that is too.
Yes, there's lime and something with that.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. So we talked about flours. Oh, let's talk about, you mentioned the 11%.
Yes.
So like we actually have used Ed's grain that
he
brought
grew.
home literally in a kitty litter box.
I didn't want to say that. It sounds gross.
It was clean, but
it was clean. But I will tell you that it's a mental game to pour the grain out of it and then grind it and then eat it. I'm like, ugh. I'm gonna have to move into a bucket.
It was the only thing on the farm.
Sure, it's fine. I'm just glad.
But so the thing is on that is you don't want to use 100% of that because we haven't measured the protein.
No, you haven't measured the protein of that. I mean,
the loaf that came out was great.
Sure, there are recipes that I've seen and people who bake 100% wheat loaves and feed their starters wheat flour, and you can do that. You can transition your starters to be fed with wheat. It's not an animal that I've tackled yet, but it's possible. My sweet spot, or the sweet spot that we like eating, because that's really what you have to think about, what do you want to eat, is 50-50. So I've been making a lot of loaves that are 50% all-purpose and 50% freshly ground whole wheat, or 50% whole wheat, and then some of it's all-purpose and some of it's a bread flour. And there is a hack for bread flour because I don't want to have to purchase one more flour. So I will just keep buying my all-purpose, and then I also purchased a Vital Wheat gluten. And so there's some math, and we can put this somewhere, but you take whatever percent, like if you need 300 grams of bread flour, you will times that by 0.95 and then subtract that number from the 300, and then that little number is what you need for the wheat gluten. The bigger number is what you use for the all-purpose, and that's a good I can put that math somewhere. Math is not my strong suit, so I've been really proud of myself for figuring out that whole process.
Yeah.
There is also a way to just convert all of your all-purpose to Vital Wheat to bread flour by adding Vital Wheat gluten too. So there's a lot of that.
All right. So yes, you can make all whole wheat. That is a possibility. So yeah, we can just start working through some of these other questions we had here.
Okay. Yes. One of the questions was, can you use a bread machine to make sourdough? You absolutely can. That isn't something I've personally done just because I don't have a bread machine, but you can make your sourdough in a bread machine. And then it was just what equipment and tools do you need? And that is in the course. So as soon as you purchase, one of the first videos that you see is tools and equipment and all the things that you might have. But spoiler alert, kitchen scales, number one.
And then 2 other things you must have.
The Dutch oven's very handy, but you can bake it without it. And I really like.
And your fork.
Oh yeah, a fork and a bowl. I mean, there's some of those things that it's like I'm kind of assuming you have a bowl and I'm assuming you have a fork. So like I'm thinking what might not you have? A scale and a bench scraper, and maybe you don't have a Dutch oven, but the fork and the bowl, very, very key.
Janice is taking a drink.
Thank you, Janice. Okay, this question was feeding it every day, gray liquid on the top of her starter in the refrigerator. Is it safe to pour off and feed the starter and use it? Yes, if you keep a regular starter and your starter develops the gray liquid, which unfortunately is called hooch, we're not going to start a drinking game around that because it's just, I'm like, why did we call it that? But you can pour the gray liquid off and then feed your starter. If you keep a stiff starter, you're never going to see a gray liquid on the top. You might see like a very faint gray, like covering. It might dry out a little bit on the top if it sits in the fridge for a very long time. I'm talking months and months and months it would take for it to develop that. And if that happens, just scoop the gray stuff off, take 10 grams out, mix it with your 30 grams of water, 60 grams of flour, refresh your starter, give it a little wake up, and it'll be back to normal. It may take a little longer to come alive. It might take 24 hours, but it's so hard to kill a starter. I cannot say that enough. It's so hard to kill a starter, especially when you're feeding it such a high ratio of flour and water to starter. It's just not going to get hungry. So that's a really great reason for keeping a stiff starter. You don't have to feed it every day. It will not develop the gray liquid. What might develop gray liquid is once your leaven deflates and goes into like a sleepy, liquidy state that's very runny and becomes discard, it might develop a liquid layer on top or a gray liquid, the hooch. But you can just pour it off and then use your discard in crackers or pancakes or whatever you're wanting to use it in. Okay. This question I love. Someone has like a 2-person house. They barely go through a loaf per week. Many times they don't, and they throw it away. Is this something that's possible for you? I cannot tell you how many times I have taught this class, what's in the course, to people who are just kind of empty nesters. They're wanting to, make sourdough, but they're not going to eat a ton of bread or anything. And this is the perfect way of doing it, because if you want to make a loaf of bread and you just make your leaven whatever day you're wanting to, 12 hours before you're wanting to bake, you could even make half a thing of leaven. You could use 15 grams of stiff starter and 115 grams, or no, not 115, whatever. You can make half the recipe of leaven and just have enough leaven to make a couple loaves. Throw the loaves in the freezer, slice them up, and just pull bread out when you want it. Just pop it in the toaster. And then your starter can stay in the fridge until you're wanting to bake again. So it really is a great thing if you're not going through a lot of bread, and you're just it's just a couple of you at the house. It's perfect. Actually, one of my favorite classes I taught at someone else's house. It was this woman for her birthday every year. Her friends, there's like 12 of them. They all get together. They all have summer birthdays, and they do something together. Like they will I forget one of the things. One time they went kayaking and they had a picnic somewhere, and then they like kayaked or hiked around. They do experiences because they're like, we've got everything. We don't want gifts. We want to do stuff with our friends. So I went to this lady's house and I taught her and all of her friends this sourdough course, and every single one of them, they were probably in their late 50s, early 60s, and they're like, just my husband and I. But they're like, when our kids come home for the holidays, we'd love to be able to whip up some cinnamon rolls or make some soft pretzels for the ball game or whatever people were coming home for. They wanted to be able to do something that felt special and like a treat. And I'm like, this is perfect. You can bake a loaf every once in a while when you and your husband want it. And then when your kids come home, you can pull out all the stops. So anyway, that was a long time on that, but it's perfect. The cold retard, again, the bulk formation versus the cold retard times. You don't have to do a cold retard. We've kind of talked about that already. I think it helps develop the flavor and the sourness. I also think, oh, hold on. We're coming out. Okay. All right, here's our loaf of bread. You may ooh and ah now. We will let that cool for just a little bit, and we will slice it. I'm going to put it back here.
The viewership instantly jumped when you showed that.
No, it did not.
Yes, it did.
Are you serious?
Yes.
Oh my gosh. I mean, as it should. Bread is so pretty. It's such a... It got kind of funny over there, but that's okay. And, you know, that is part of it. It's like, what is going to come out of the oven, you know? It's fun. What was I talking about? The cold proof. Yeah, the bulk fermentation, I think of it like this. The bulk fermentation is when all the activity's happening, when all the life is getting... everything's coming alive. It's kind of like when you're waiting for your leaven to develop or your starter to develop. That's when the bacteria is really doing its thing. And then the cold proof is helping to develop flavor. It's making it easier to digest. And it's also just kind of like a holding tank. Like if you find yourself late at night and you're like, I do not want to stay up another hour and bake my bread, throw it in your fridge. Shape it, put it in the proofing basket, pop it in your fridge. I use my fridge a lot as like a holding tank. I've eaten plenty from an Amish bakery, but I've never made it myself. Do you like to eat healthy? Yes. So here's the fun thing about sourdough is that there's no legislation. And I don't really want there to be legislation just personally, but you have to know that so many times what you think is sourdough is not actually sourdough. There is vinegars, flavorings, things that are being added to your bread. And this is not anything against the Amish, but I've often seen sourdough bread that is made by Amish communities that is soured because of flavorings that are added or vinegars that are added. It's not actually sourdough. If you see yeast in the ingredient list, it's not sourdough. Sourdough has very few ingredients, even if they might add like a malt barley or a citric acid or something, which I've seen there's some at Costco. Ding. There's a really quality sourdough loaf. It has a few extra ingredients in it, like a citric acid, but it's clean. There's no yeast in it. I was super impressed. I was like, good job, Costco. But just know that if you're going to Kroger, you're going to the grocery store, even sometimes the Amish bakeries, it's not actually sourdough. So that's just something to keep in mind. That might not be exactly what you think it is. If it says something like sourdough starter or sourdough cultures or something like that, you want to see different language besides if it has yeast in it, it's not sourdough. So there's that. It doesn't taste like the sourdough bread I ate when I lived in California, not sourdough enough. I would say that to get your sourdough really sour, which some people want and some people don't, you're going to want to let things just go a little longer. Like you might want to let your leaven go a little past. You might want to let your dough overproof a tiny bit. You might want to leave it in the fridge for longer. All of those things are going to develop that sour flavor. But here's the thing about sourdough. I was just reading this to Michael this morning when we were out on the deck, that a sourdough starter changes from day to day. It changes from moment to moment. Like they looked at 15 different sourdough starters from bakeries, and they were all given the same flour, the same salt, they were using all the same things. But when they looked at the sourdough starter under the microscope, there was wildly different bacteria. I mean, they were all of the same kind of strain, but it was just really different. And even from day to day, it changed. So the sourdough starter that I'm working with today is going to be different than the sourdough starter that I worked with yesterday. And that's because of the bacteria that's all around us, that's on my hands. Maybe that freaks you out, but I think that's really cool. Like I washed my hands, but there's just a lot of other things at play. We're mostly microbes, we're just a bunch of bacteria walking around.
Janice has an interesting point. She says, stir in the hooch for extra sour sourdough.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. Yeah. However, you're probably not going to have the hooch with a stiff starter, but yeah, with the regular starter, that it is it's sour. It's also kind of that signal that it's like hungry and it needs more energy. So that's what's going to make it more sour. You can buy sourdough starters from San Francisco. My thought, and I wonder if it will continue to stay, like after you feed it, wherever you're located, if it will still stay the same.
Well, I mean, the more and more we understand about the microbiome and just the world of
Bacteria,
microbes, is that it will start to regionally change. So like the as you pull it out, unless you were to keep it in a clean room, the local yeast would start getting added to it, and it would start to slowly change. So it may not be as.
And sour. I don't know that it would live in a clean room, because it's one of the things that sometimes I think we're a little too sterile. Like bacteria, and it's not bad. You don't want to use chlorine in your water. You don't want to like sterilize things to such an extent that you're going to kill the bacteria that's in there. So.
All right, Kelly wants to know if we can ship the starter to Canada. I do not see why not, Kelly. There may be a slight additional shipping charge, but we've shipped many a thing to Canada already, so we will try this one too.
It's a much smaller thing.
This one isn't as legal as the other stuff we've shipped.
Probably shouldn't say that right now. Okay, any other things, or should I keep working through this?
I think we're good. Let's just keep working through that.
Okay. I've watched many people bake their loaves in a cold oven and others a hot oven. I like to preheat my oven and my pan all together. Oh, the warm spot in my kitchen, we kind of already discussed that. Maybe the hack with the...
but also on top of your fridge is always a common one.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't put it anywhere drafty. Anywhere that is cold, don't put it there. But if you're like, ooh, I always feel nice and warm and snuggly in my couch, like, put it there. Put it in your couch. Wrap it up in a blanket, Think about where you would like to hang out if you wanted to stay warm. Put your sourdough starter there. Do I need a banetone or proofing basket? You do not. You can use the bowl with the tea towel. If you want to do the oval loaves, you can use a towel and like a bread tin. So you don't need a banetone. All my bread turns out too heavy. How to make it crusty and airy? This question, and this is a dense question, it is all about your starter and keeping your starter really happy. And when you keep a stiff starter, you're keeping your starter really happy because you're feeding it so much flour in relation to how much starter you're using. So you only have 10 grams of starter and you're adding the 30 grams of water and 60 grams of flour. So it's going to stay really happy. It's going to stay really fed. And then when you go to make leaven, you're taking 30 grams of your super happy starter. You're adding the 120 grams or 130 grams of water, 120 grams of flour. So you're feeding it a really nice ratio of flour, and you're going to have a nice, big, bubbly leaven. And I think, in my opinion, that was the pivotal change for me. And then when I was telling my friends, I felt like I had this like secret. I was like, guys, listen to what I'm doing. I don't know if this is okay or not. Like, I don't know if I should tell people, because it sounds kind of crazy. But instead of just trying to feed my starter enough flour and water to make it happy and like hope, I have this system for having my stiff starter, feeding it to make leaven, and then I always have like a really nice, happy, bubbly leaven. And I really haven't, knock on wood, run into stiff, dense, heavy loaves. Now, I have definitely underproofed loaves where it's a little gummy inside. I've overproofed loaves where it doesn't rise as much. All of those loaves are still totally edible. They might not be what I was going for, but they're still edible. We've had, quite a bit of like French toast casserole, and I've made a lot of croutons, but if you do this process, you are you're not going to run into the dense loaf thing as much. There's still the proofing aspect that you kind of need to nail down. And that's one of those things that the more you do it, the more that you'll recognize like, oh, that's what I'm looking for. I'm good to bake now, or I'm good to put it in my fridge now, or whatever. But this step from stiff starter to leaven really ensures that you're never working with a hungry sourdough starter, which in my opinion is what leads to these really deflated brick-like sourdough starters or loaves, sourdough loaves.
So did you see this Costco deal that someone's asking about? the double 3.5 and the 5.5.
Oh yeah, the 5.5 would be big enough to bake in. The 3.5 quart, you probably would just do like a mini loaf in. It wouldn't be big enough to do a standard loaf in. But that 5.5 one, that's good.
Yeah, that is cute though.
It is cute. Yeah. Okay, I've never made bread, but I'm interested in making my own sourdough and grinding my own wheat or rye. I love that. I stole my mom's wheat grinder because she wasn't using it because she has celiac disease and isn't going to be grinding her own wheat at all. And I got some wheat from my co-op, and then we got some wheat from our grower friend locally here. And I've been grinding that. One of the things is you don't want to grind too much wheat because it can go rancid unless you can vacuum seal it or put it in your freezer or something like that. That definitely helps. But I've really enjoyed grinding my own wheat. I add a little wheat flour to the pizza crust that I make. And I do like the 50-50 loaf. And this loaf is wonderful. This loaf, I feel like, taught me to be a confident sourdough bread baker. And I'm just eternally grateful for it. But I really do like now having the wheat loaves because it feels like it's probably better for us. So, but yeah, if you've never baked bread before and you're wanting to, I cannot emphasize how helpful. I wish that someone had come along to me 6 years ago and was like, here, just do this. Because all I had was my desire to not quit and figure it out, plus the internet, which is just like a wild Western show as everybody's doing crazy stuff. And that's completely fine. More power to them. I love that. It just was hard to wade through like what worked for me, and some people are very, very technical. And that was overwhelming. And then some people were just very loosey-goosey, like just throw it together. And that didn't work for me either. So I really needed this like sweet spot. Like I need enough direction that I'm going to end up with something successful, but do not overwhelm me with too many like technical details. Otherwise my brain starts shutting down because I have so many other things I have to think about. I can't think about all that. So, this question is, they did a starter with yeast the first time, but would love to learn how to do a native starter. The native yeast is what's living on the flour that you use to create your starter. So if you do the little make your own starter like we did earlier in our time together, that's how you will go about making your own starter. And yeah, you just got to keep going. It'll work. Knowing when the starter is ready, my bread turned out into a heavy, hard brick. Haven't tried again. So that is a very, very common question. With the stiff starter, you'll know when it's ready. Again, it's probably going to more than double in size. When you refresh this, and this was in the workshop video, it looks like a ball of Play-Doh. And when it's ready, it's expanded. It's filled out the jar. You can see the bubbles. You can take your finger and kind of pull away the top layer and see all the webs that are inside of there. That's when you know that your starter's ready. And from there, you can go ahead and take out the 30 grams to make some leaven. And you'll know when your leaven is ready when it's more than doubled in size, probably, I don't want to say tripled, but almost. And it's nice and jiggly and got the big bubbles, the big air holes. And you have a window of time when your leaven is ready. It's not like, okay, my leaven's ready, I got to use it all right now. You can, let it, like I let it go all afternoon. Like I said, I made it before bed. So it went all night and all day, and it was still usable this evening if I had wanted to. So there's probably a good 6 to 10 hour window if it's not too hot. If it's hot, that window is smaller. But there's that. Okay. How long does the whole process take? Did we kind of already cover that?
But let's interject real quick here. Do the loaf pans have to be cast iron as well?
The loaf pans, if you're making like a bread loaf, no. You can use glass, stainless steel.
Well, I mean, to that point, the cast iron, the
Dutch oven.
The only reason that is cast iron is because cast iron, but the one she showed that has a smooth interior.
That's enamel coated cast iron. Yeah, that's
totally fine too.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah. How do I restart my levain after I left too long and got hooch on it? Do I have to start over?
Yeah, if you've left your leaven too long, it's now discard. You can either make more leaven. If you have a stiff starter, take some more of that stiff starter out and make another leaven. If for some reason you use all your stiff starter and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't have these flies are killing me. You can take a little bit of your leaven. You could take 10 grams of your leaven and the 30 grams of water and the 60 grams of flour and make more stiff starter out of that. Or you could, I've never taken leaven to make more leaven. To me, you could maybe do that once or twice, but that's where you start getting into that area of having a hungry starter. Like you're not going to have enough like vibrant bacteria to really continue taking your bread into the future with all of the bacterial energy that it needs. I don't know if that's the best way to say that, but that's what a lot of my friends were doing. They had their discard sitting in the fridge and they would take some of the discard out, feed it flour and water, and that's what kind of would make their leaven, and that's what they'd use to make bread. And it worked at first, but then it started turning into these dense loaves of bread. And they were like, Savannah, what are we doing wrong? And I was like, okay, that's when I would tell them. When they got to that point, I would share with them my stiff starter leaven bread kind of method. But until then, I'd let them just keep doing whatever made sense for them. Because there's so many ways that people do it. And I'm not trying to dog anyone's way of making sourdough. I mean, if it works for you, keep going. But if you're running into trouble, this is worth a shot.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's pretty much it. I think you kind of talked the process through, how long it takes.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we're good on that.
Okay.
If people do have additional questions, you can go ahead and drop those in. I did kind of think it was fun because we eat a lot of sourdough, and breakfast was sourdough. So I kind of wanted to show them that picture from this morning.
Oh, yeah.
Let's hopefully that I can share this with y'all. Yeah, so this was breakfast this morning. My parents are in town for a couple days, so we kind of made it a slight bit fancier. But Kate was very excited about this morning.
She kept going up to the bagel like she's going to hug it.
Yes, but yeah, so that was breakfast for us this morning. But I mean, again, so talk through the process for making those bagels. What time did you get up this morning to, like, what time did we eat?
Well, so I had made the leaven yesterday. So I guess I didn't make that leaven yesterday evening. I would have made that yesterday, like late, probably early afternoon, maybe like around lunchtime or a little after I made the leaven. So by 9 o'clock in the evening yesterday, my leaven was ready. And I mixed up the bagel dough before I went to bed. And it's really straightforward. It's sourdough starter, bread flour, salt, a little bit of sugar, but I probably could have left it out too. I forget what else. That might be it, actually. The ratios are different because you want a dense dough. And I did use my KitchenAid mixer with the dough hook to finish off the dough kneading, but you wouldn't have to. You could totally do it by hand, and you end up with a really dense, smooth loaf of dough. I covered it with an oiled piece of plastic wrap, and it sat on my counter overnight. And I got up, I don't know, what time did I get up this morning? 7:30 probably, when I was down in the kitchen, and I fiddle-faddled around a little bit, poured the dough out on the counter, chopped up the dough into little, chunks, made my bagels, and then I let the bagels do like a second proof on the cookie trays that I had them sitting on while my water came to a boil on the stove and my oven preheated and all of that. So by the time that was done, it probably wasn't a whole hour. Maybe it was 15, 20 minutes. And then you boil them for a little while, and then you bake them or you top them. I did some fancy toppings today. So, we probably ate by what?
Before 9.
Yeah. I also, had bacon and eggs and things that you want to put on your
tomatoes,
yes,
cucumbers.
Yes, all the cream cheese. Our farm made sriracha, which is really good. Yeah. So yeah, they're called Sunday morning bagels. And we had them Sunday morning.
Here's a question. All right, so now the question is, how do you keep the stiff starter going?
Yeah, the stiff starter lives in your fridge. The only time you need to feed it or refresh it is when you need more of it. And you only need to use 10 grams of it to make more of it, which is like a teaspoon. So as you're using your stiff starter to make leaven, just go, oh, I'm getting kind of low on that. Sometimes I'll even just scrape down what's on the outside of the jar and use that. I'll take that 10 grams, add the 30 grams of water, 60 grams of flour, and I've fed my starter. So you only have to feed it when you need more of it. I'm calling it feeding it or refreshing it like you would a regular starter, but it's really just making more of it when you need it.
Patrice asked, can I start my starter with whole wheat and then feed with unbleached flour? So can you go back and forth between different flours?
I probably, if it were me, I wouldn't personally start my starter with whole wheat. I'd probably start my starter with all-purpose, and then if you need to feed it whole wheat, if you're like running low on all-purpose or something, it would be totally fine occasionally. I know that there are people who keep whole wheat starters, but they're separate from all-purpose flours. So I think there is some wiggle room there. It's not something I've experimented with at this point, but it's definitely possible. I probably just wouldn't start my starter from scratch with whole wheat flour, but that's just me.
And then is that the same jar or a new jar?
I like to use a fresh, clean jar, mostly just because I'm weighing my ingredients on the scale. So I don't technically know how much starter is left in my jar. So it's easier for me to use a fresh jar, put the 10 grams in. Because often what I do is when I'm making leaven and I feel like I'm getting kind of low, even if it's not completely empty, I'll just go ahead and make more starter so that I never run out. At this point, I'm like doubling my starter recipes. There's starter and leaven everywhere. So I made like a gallon jar of leaven the other day.
You did. Yes, we did. All right. Leanne's saying I have a dehydrated starter. Can I go ahead and begin my starter with it?
Absolutely. There's lots of different ways to do it. I'm sure your dehydrated starter came with instructions, so I would just follow those. If you do not want to follow those, I do walk through rehydrating dehydrated starter in the course. It's one of the videos that you have immediate access to.
All right.
And should I cut this?
Yeah, you can cut it if you want.
It's hot, and you really shouldn't cut hot dough. But we're going to live just wild and crazy.
Okay.
You sharpened my bread knife today. The reason you don't want to cut your bread hot is because the crumb is still setting inside of it, and it can sometimes get a little gooey if you cut it too early. I'm feeling, oh yeah, it's a little gummy, but it still looks pretty good. Can people see that?
Bring that up for them.
Ooh, it's steamy.
Yeah, it doesn't have huge holes either on this one.
It doesn't. Yeah, you can achieve bigger holes if you want that with like a higher hydration loaf. This is not a higher hydration loaf. Again, I think of this as like a loaf that's perfect for like learning how to ride a bike. It's not necessarily training wheels, but it's like a bike that you're not going to fall too far on your face if you try.
Yes. Well, and I think the reason is we like butter on our bread, and large holes means that the butter falls through.
Yeah, nobody wants that. Nobody wants leaky butter.
Yes. When I make my starter dough, the lid open. No, you want to keep your lid on. You don't want fruit flies in it.
Yeah, you don't want fruit flies in it. And if you have a fruit fly epidemic, like we usually do this time of year, you'll want to keep something covering it, but you don't necessarily want to seal it unless you're keeping it in the fridge. If it's moved to the fridge, you can seal your jar because you also don't want to dry it out.
Yeah, we got some questions about the course actually. So there is 4 different videos in the course immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And then in mid-October, we are filming most of it. And the reason for not filming it right away is because we want to make sure that all their questions are answered.
Yeah, we kind of were just, diving in and not figuring out this part as we go, but wanting to make sure that we really tailor it to be something that people will find useful. So we wanted to do the workshop. We wanted to see what kind of questions came in, and then we can really tailor. We have content that we're definitely going to cover.
Well, you teach classes every couple.
Yeah, I teach classes every month, sometimes multiple times a month. So I know what people's questions are, and I know kind of where the hangups are, where people can get stuck. So we definitely want to spend time on those, and we do in the course.
But even tonight, we've picked up some questions that are going to make it into the course.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, we're working on it. We did, let's see. So yeah, there will be released then. And yes, you will have the recordings too. So even if you're not home, Kelly, you can come back. You'll have, we can't say lifetime, but you'll have a very long time, years, is to access these.
You'll be such a great sourdough baker, you won't need access to the course anymore.
Yes.
And I will say that there's like a few things that like once you kind of figure those things out, and it mostly has to do with your starter and leaven and maybe some proofing things. Once you get those dialed in, sky's the limit. You can bake anything that you want with sourdough after you get that stuff. Like chocolate sourdough, cookie, there's all kinds of things. Yeah. Focaccia.
I did want to show, though, actually inside the course. I know we're going to... was there anything else we needed to do tonight? Anything else? We'll keep answering questions as they come in, but I did want to go ahead and share inside the course because how we've got it set up is pretty awesome. And we have transcripts for the course too. So when you go into the lesson, you'll see like this is the current lesson right here. You can go ahead and hit start and watch the video right there. But you can also have these bookmarks. So we try to do longer lessons with bookmarks, and that's the reason for longer lessons. Let's say you're casting this to a TV. You don't have to get up and hit the computer every time to change to a different, shorter lesson. So they're longer lessons, but you can bookmark too. So if you just want to go to that, again, what we did today was making a starter from native yeast. You just click on that. It'll take you right to that section. And then if you want to watch the transcript, you can click on that button and it will show you a box. And as the lesson goes forward, it'll follow along in the transcript. This blue, we are changing the color. I talked to the team about that. They're trying to figure out how to make that happen, and it will be changed.
It's hard to read.
But right now, it's a little hard to read. So that is going to change. But anyway, it is nice to have that transcript as well. So yeah, that's just a little bit about that. And then of course, if there is worksheets or if there are recipes and all of that, that will be linked below. We can add those right below in here as well for you. So you have all that information. But you can see here how we have the, let's see if we can get to a section that has the dual
starter with just flour and water.
I think it was right there that has
to be as precise as possible, but if you're like 1 gram off, it's not going to throw anything into a tizzy too much. We're just mixing this up with.
Do you mean like the above view and the?
Yes, the one that Buddy and I worked very hard on. Yes, there you go. So that's an above view, guys, that that Buddy and I worked pretty hard on to make sure you guys had a really good view of exactly what she was doing. Tonight's setup wasn't quite as nice as that, but yes, there you go. So that's all I wanted to show there. But again, our goal with this is to make it really, really easy for you guys to access and beautifully shot and good audio. So, and Sandy, yes, we will have this video available later on. This will be put into the workshop page. So we'll be able to do that as well. Let's see. Shannon's saying, I'm having trouble with the bulk fermentation phase. I'm not seeing bubbles of growth from the methods I'm using so far. What should my dough look like at the end of the bulk fermentation?
Yeah, it should have grown 20 to 50% from its original ball of dough. You're going to want to see bubbles. It should have a slight jiggle. When you poke it, you should be able to feel like your finger leaves a little bit of an indentation, and that you can kind of feel that you're like depressing air. You know what I mean? Like you've poked it and you've like popped some bubbles. So if you're not seeing that in your bulk fermentation step, my question would be, do you end up with loaves that you like to eat that are to your satisfaction and your bulk fermentation is just getting a little weird? I would imagine that if it's not bulk fermenting, kind of in a typical process, that the issue is your starter. So if you're using a starter that's hungry, that isn't like vibrant and like perking up really fast, it's super liquidy, that if you switched your starter over to a stiff starter, made the leaven, then tried that bread dough recipe again, let me know. I think you might have different results. I suppose it could be the bread recipe itself. But even when I don't like a bread recipe I'm using, like it has too much water and it's giving me like a really sticky dough, or I just don't really like the process that the author of the recipe walks me through, I'll usually end up with something that I like to eat. especially using my stiff starter and the leaven. So I hope that was helpful.
Yes. All right. So I think that answered that question. One last thing I wanted to show folks the process of signing up, because we have had some questions about that. I think it's worth talking to folks about a little bit about the different options we have, because obviously we have the comprehensive masterclass. So that's obviously the one here, which is just the course, the online course. And that has the step-by-step course, the manuscript, the bonus, a couple different bonuses, and our online community where all your local folks hang out and ask questions.
Well, yeah. So all the people who've taken my class can, if they want, or on Facebook, join this sourdough Facebook group. And it's really nice because there's a lot of people who have gone from not baking sourdough to baking lots of sourdough, and like baking sourdough croissants. Like I haven't baked sourdough croissants. It's on my list, but I haven't done it yet. And so they're doing all kinds of cool things in there, you know?
Yeah. It's a good
and so they can answer questions too. Like if I don't see something right away, they usually have good advice.
And then the next option we have is joining us in the kitchen.
Yeah.
So that's going to be pretty much all day affair.
I will feed you lunch. There will be sourdough involved.
Yeah. And you'll take home our stiff starter as well with you.
Yes.
Yeah. And you'll visit the farm, all that fun stuff. And then talk a little bit about the sourdough startup, because that was another question people had. So what is that?
That is essentially how we teach you to teach your own sourdough classes. So, you know, there's a lot of people that are making sourdough loaves and selling their sourdough loaves, and that's a great option to like make a little side income. I will say though, teaching people how to make sourdough has been far more profitable for me than I could bake a ton of loaves, but it's way more profitable to be like, hey, I have this skill. I am charging you for it. You are getting a lot for it. You're getting to eat bread. I always try to make something really delicious. So if even they think that the class was a total crap shoot, they got a really tasty treat out of it.
But they haven't. They all love it.
No. I've never gotten that feedback, but it's just something that's always in the back of my head. You will eat something yummy. Anyway, it's how to create a course that you can teach for somebody else. So it's all the resources I've created that I can give to you, and then you can turn around and go, oh.
The software we use, all the sample Facebook ads, all the sample language we use around it.
My handouts.
The emails we send. And I think the thing is, last time with one Facebook post, how fast did we sell out 3 classes?
In under 24 hours, all 3 classes were sold out with one Facebook post.
Yeah.
Because I just think, I mean, it's weird to say this because we're online right now, but I just think that people are tired of just having to only do things online. Like the cool thing about sourdough is that I can give you some in a class and then you can go do something with it. Like I love the virtual aspect of so many things, but sometimes we just want something real to do. And so that has been the beauty of the class. And then people, you know, have community and friendship, and everyone's like, oh my gosh, that's the great thing about the Facebook group, is that everybody can show off their goods. Because not everybody cares, you know, that you just made a really beautiful loaf of bread. But we do. We want to see it.
Yeah, and so that is all going to be released in November, and there will be a separate enrollment for that, separate series. But we include it in case you do want to grab it all at once. But yeah, that is I think that's the fastest way. That is one of the most profitable classes our farm offers by far.
Yeah, people say they want to can, but then when I'm like, hey, I'll teach you how to can, they're like, oh, I think I'm busy. But no one's not shown up to a sourdough class unless they've been actually ill.
Yeah, and we have had that, and they've been very upset about that.
Yeah, they're like, oh my gosh.
But yeah, when you go ahead and here, you just click on the Get It Now button right here, and that will take you to the checkout page right here. Information in, and add your payment information, and hit complete purchase, and you're all set to go. And then again, if you do have further questions, you can drop right below here, and you can either text your questions here to us at this number here. One of our team will answer that, or also email us right here. And Brie, our awesome customer support, and she does so much else for us. But that is just one of the things she does for us. She will get back to you on that as well. So
I love when she texts me. Should I have more sourdough questions?
yes, yeah,
Like, okay.
yeah. But yeah, those are the that. Just want to share that real quick, and then we will dive back into your questions. And folks, we'll probably go ahead and wrap it up here in just a few minutes. Oh, here's a great question. What is the difference between einkorn bread versus wheat versus einkorn all-purpose versus regular versus unbleached? Is one healthier? It doesn't matter. This is a great question because this is how you started.
Yep. I started with a homemade einkorn sourdough starter, baking with just einkorn flour. It's an ancient grain. The gluten, the protein, the glutens are very low. It's very easy to digest. It tastes really good. It's amazing. There's some people who bake with it exclusively. I made some bread and we ate it, but it was very, very dense. What I know now is that if I were to go back to baking with einkorn with the experience that I have now, I would feel a lot better about it. But at the time, it was really hard to feel successful baking with einkorn flour. I made a lot of English muffins, and they were good. And einkorn flour has a lot of nutrients. It's an old grain. It is very good for you. But I will say that if you are not someone who's baked much or you've not baked sourdough at all, it would not be what I recommend you start with. Unless you really want to, and then go for it. The jovial people that do the einkorn flour and a lot of other really wonderful things. I love their pasta, their gluten-free pastas. I use their flours. I have everything good to say about them. They're fantastic. And they have great resources for einkorn flour. It's a hard place to start. So I'll leave it at that. We ate a lot of English muffins.
All right, one final question here. My bread has a nice structure and taste, but is sticky. What could cause the stickiness?
That makes me think that maybe it was not proofed long enough or potentially overproofed. So you might just want to play around with that. Like if the structure's good and you like the way it looks and everything, but the stickiness, you could bake it a little longer. But I probably would think that it's the proofing times. You might want to tweak that a little bit. Soon. Yeah, I know. I was already looking at this loaf like, oh, I really cut that too soon. It's like it's doughy. It's fine. We'll still eat it. It's no big deal.
Yeah, or make croutons.
I don't think it'll get there.
All right, folks. Well, I think that is kind of a wrap. Appreciate you guys hanging out with us for about an hour and a half. And again, we have the workshop videos. We up for a few more days. This class will be this Q&A will be up for a few more days as well. Mm-hmm. So if you want to rewatch it, because we do talk through at the beginning about how to shape your loaves and leaven, and I know all that. Some folks were a little want to re-see that. Mm-hmm. But again, if you want to go the next step, want to go deeper, that's what the course is for. Yeah. And that will help you go way deeper. And give you a lot more information. Yeah, and I mean the goal with every class I've taught and the goal with the course is just to really make you feel confident at doing it, because I know how overwhelming it can feel, and you don't want to mess it up because you're using this flour and you don't want to feel like you wasted stuff. So it's just like, don't overthink it, do these steps, and I promise that you'll have something that you'll want to eat. Even if it's not perfect or exactly what you want, you're going to be way ahead of the game just following some simple steps that I don't think they feel too complicated. It is a lot of steps, but not overwhelmingly so. All right, and that's a wrap. Okay, thanks guys.